So it's 2 o'clock, let's get started. Welcome to lesson 2 of Introduction to Python. Today we'll be talking about flow control. Today's lesson we are going to go over Python statements and then go over some small things like comments and then operators. And the next half of the class will be about if statements, and then at the end we'll go over examples. So what is a Python statement? A statement is basically a single line of Python code. It's one command that we do. If we look at the example here, we can see that our first statement is assigning the value of the string hello to string 1. So this is one statement. And then down on line 3, we have printing string 1, and then this is another statement. The idea of multilines is that we can take this one statement and then put it on multiple lines. And the way to do that is to use the line continuation character. Let's look at an example. So let's just say I want to assign a value of an integer to x, but instead of directly giving the integer value, we instead want to give 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4 plus 5. But when we type it in here, it's a little bit too long. Oh, I'm so sorry, my thing was paused. So we have here the multi-line statement, and the idea of this is in the example we have string 1 is hello, and then we print string 1. And these two are two different statements, and if we have a statement that's too long, one thing we can do is use the multiline character. So the multiline character, what it does is, let's say we want to assign the value of x to 1 plus 2 plus 3 all the way to 5. And instead of putting this all on one line, in order to make it be able to show up on the screen and not be too long, what we can do is add this character here, and then this backslash basically says, okay, the numbers on the next line are going to be technically part of the first line. So let's look at an example of this. Let's say we want to assign y equals 2 plus 3, and then we can add this so that if we go on the next line, this second line, everything we put on here, will still technically be part of the first line. So if we put plus 4, what do you think will happen if we print y? Right, so since this is still part of the first command or the statement, we can see that if we print out y, it will be 9 instead of 5 because the continuation character tells us that everything on the second line is still part of this command. Okay, let's look at the reverse version. What if we want to combine short statements into one line? This isn't actually recommended for most statements because once you start assigning longer variables or doing longer lines, then you don't want to do this. But if we want to assign, let's say, 3 different variables on one line, then we would use the combination character, which is a semicolon. The example of this is, let's say I want to assign x, y, and z to different numbers, and I want to do it all on one line. If I want to do that, then I can add the semicolon in between to tell Python, hey, this is one statement, this is another statement, and this is a third statement. So what do you think would happen if we print out this code? Great, so we will basically be printing out 1, 2, and 3. And then if you're not sure about the syntax of that, one good thing is to just directly go on the site and then copy the code, type it out, and then be able to run it. So if we run this, we get print x, y, z, which is equal to 1, 2, 3. Okay, the next main thing we're going to go over is comments. There are a couple main things you should understand about comments, and first of all, they don't actually change the program. So the idea of comments is that we can take this symbol, which is the pound sign or the hashtag as people call it more often, and end up writing out a piece of English language or just anything, but the idea is it doesn't actually change the code. Like if I were to put a comment, a hashtag here, then we would turn this statement into a comment. And when this happens, this just doesn't run because it's a comment and therefore no longer part of the actual program. So if I run this, what do you think will happen? Okay, so yeah, so as people are saying, nothing happens. It won't run an error because nothing actually is going to happen. All we did was assign the variable, so if we run this, nothing would print out. And the idea of comments is when you get into more advanced programming, or if you just want to be able to analyze a piece of code fast, then you can add a comment and then write basically commentary and say, okay, this piece of code down here will write and explain so and so. And it doesn't actually change the program. Okay, this next segment of the video, we are going to go over a couple things from last week. So we went over Boolean variables, which is a variable with a true or false value. And then we also went over some of the basics of operators. But today we're going to have to look at this in detail. So the first operator we're going to look at is the AND. Do you guys remember what kind of that is from last week? Okay, so what? So it's not as important from last week, but as people are private messaging, it tells you something and something else. So when you have two different pieces or two different statements that are both Boolean, then the idea is and gives a true or false value. So let's look at the example. If we have two different statements, we have it is raining and I have an umbrella. And the idea of this is that we can see that it is raining would be the first statement. And let's say it actually is raining. Then the value of this statement is true. And then if we look at the other statement, I have an umbrella. Let's say I do have an umbrella indeed. So these would both be true. And the idea of and is if both of these are true, then we can say that the entire statement is true. So if it is raining is true and I have an umbrella is true, then the value of true and true is true. And this is really important. See, this is hopefully pretty simple to understand because if both are true, then them together is true. But what if it is raining and I don't have an umbrella? What would that be? So it is raining is true, right? Because it is raining. And then I have an umbrella is false because I don't have an umbrella. So this would be equal to true and false. And the idea of this is saying that if something is true and something is false, then it is false because not and only is true. This is the one sentence you need to remember about and is only true if both statements are true. So even if one of these are false, then the value of and would be false. And then what about false and false? If both are false, let's say it is not raining and I don't have an umbrella, what would this statement be? So the question was, if it is not raining, this value would be false. And if I do not have an umbrella, this is also false. What would the value of false and false be? Great, so it would be false because and is true only if both are true. And if one of them is false or both of them are false, then it would be false. Thank you for private messaging. Yeah. Now, the next statement we're going to look at is or. And the important thing about or is that it has one main difference between and. So with this exact same example, we can see it is raining or I have an umbrella. So with and, again, if both of these are true, only if both of these are true, then it will be true. However, the idea with or is that if at least one of these is true, then it is true. Okay, let's go over the three different possibilities. If it is raining, and that is true, and I do have an umbrella, and this is true, then we get true or true. True or true is equal to true because at least one of these is true. Now, what if it is raining or I don't have an umbrella? So I don't have an umbrella means this is false, and let's just say it is raining, meaning this is true. So if this statement is true or false, at least one of these values is true, right? So would that make or true or false true or false? Oops, sorry. So the idea of this is that it would be true because the main difference between and or is that true and false is equal to false because not both of them are true. But with or, only one of them needs to be true in order for the entire statement to be true. And since it is raining is true, even though I have an umbrella is false, at least one of these values is true, therefore making the whole thing true. And then again, with false or false, we have it is raining being false, or I have an umbrella being false. And then the idea of this is saying that since neither of these is true, then the entire statement cannot be true, making it false. So this is a little bit harder to understand, so let's go over some examples. Let's say I have that's not supposed to have, one being false and two being true. Okay, let's say I have one and two. So one thing to note is that in Python, since and is considered an operator, this will be the same color as, say, print, false, or true, because it is an operator and it's not just some normal thing. So what do you think this would print out? Okay, good. So this would print out false because note that this is and instead of or. And with and, both of these need to be true in order for it to be true. And since one is not true, then this is false. What about one or two? Good, this would be true because or only requires one of these to be true. And then the final logical operator that you guys need to know is not. Not doesn't work the same way as the other ones because not is just put in front of the condition. It's like saying this is whatever this is, it's not this. So let's just say I have a variable called raining. Let's run this example. Let's say I have raining is equal to true. So in real life, if we have something that is not true, what would that be? Okay, good. So something that is not true is false. And then this is where the importance of Boolean happens because there are only two values for Boolean, true and false. And what this means is that something that is not true is false. So if we run this, then it would print out false. Okay, what about not false? Sorry. it's still raining, but let's say the value of raining is false. What do you think this would print out? Okay, good. So again, since there are only two different values, then we could print not false as true. And then, okay, so this is pretty much the idea of not. It's just the opposite. Okay, so now that we've gone over these three, the important thing to note is that if we have two values, A and B, each being assigned either true or false, A and B, and A or B, for false, if both A and B are false, then they're both false. And if they're both true, then they're both true. But the main difference between and or is if one of them is false. So in this case, let's look. If A is false and B is true, A and B is false because, again, this is really important, so I'm just going to be restating this. And requires both of them to be true, so false and true is false. But since or only requires one of them to be true, it's true. And then again, we can see for not A is taking the opposite of A, and if A is false, not A is true, and then if A is true, not A is false. Okay, so the logical operators work on Boolean, but if we look at relational operators, these typically work on two numbers. There are a couple main operators you should know, and they basically work the same way as in math. And if we have less than over here and the greater than over here, then they both work just as they do in math. And I'm going to pause here kind of. So someone asked, when is this used in coding? And that will be gone over in the second half of the class. Moving on, again, just like in math, we have less than or equal to and greater than or equal to. The thing with relational operators is that when you actually compare them, they only have a true or false value. And these two might be slightly newer. So we have equal to, but instead of a single equal to sign, we have two equal to signs. And then we have not equal to, which is an exclamation point and then the equal sign. Okay, a common mistake that people make is that, let's look at this piece of code. We have A equals 2, so we assign the value of 2 to A. And then here we have if A equals 1. Does anyone see the error just like right now? Okay, so here's the thing. If we go back to the previous slide, we can see that when we compare relational operators, we have equal equal as in equal to. Great, so as someone said, it does say that. And the importance of this is that this doesn't run because the main difference between one equal sign and two equal signs is that one equal sign assigns the value. So if we were to do this, we're trying to reassign the value of 1 to A. But that doesn't work in this statement. We need to be able to use two equal signs in order to actually compare them. Okay, so let's go over some examples of relational operators. And before I start, I'm just going to mention briefly that relational operators can only have true or false values. So if the relational statement is true, then the value will be true. But if the relational statement is false, it will be false. Another thing to mention is that if you look in the chat, Mr. Chromebook mentioned that less than or equal to and greater than. But the important thing to note is that in Python, the equal sign will always go after the relational thing. So if we have less than or equal to, the less than sign will go first, because if we go equal to less than, it just doesn't work. Okay, let's try some of these examples to make better sense of this. What value would this give? Okay, good. So it would give true because 10 is greater than 4. So as we can see, the value is true. What about this one? Okay, so this would be equal to true because 2 is greater than equal to 2. Now notice that if we didn't have this equal sign, then it would just be 2 is greater than 2. And 2 is not greater than 2, and that would be false. However, this statement is true because we have this equal sign, so since 2 is greater than equal to 2, then it would be true. What about this one? If you remember from last week, we went over floats, so we can actually compare integers and floats. Okay, good. So this would be false because 4.2 is not equal to 4. So if we see this, it would be false. And then the point of this example is to get the idea that in Python, and this doesn't apply to other languages, but mostly just Python, you can actually compare floats and integers. So even though this would still return false, it wouldn't run an error. Okay, last example here. Okay, I want you to guys to remember what this sign here says. So when we have equal equal, this sign right here says not equals to. Great. So this would be true because 5 is not equal to 2. Okay, you might have noticed from the other example that we had this thing where we had the word if. And an if statement is the body of the class today. An if statement, what it does is that it only executes a block of code if a condition is true. And someone asked earlier, what's the point of learning about relational operators or logical operators? So the point is to apply them in if statements. So we have an if statement only executing a block of code if it's true. So as we can see in this example here, we have if something happens, then we would do this. Okay, let's try and give an example. Let's reassign the value of raining to true. Okay, if I do if, and then here we have raining, then the syntax of this is the if, and then the colon at the end. And then we can put do this. So let's say print raining. Okay, again, the syntax of the if is to put the if and then a colon. And these parentheses aren't required, but they are a good habit. So what do you think this would print? Okay, good. So in this case, it would print the variable raining, which is true. So if we run this, we can see that it would print true. And what if this is false, though? What would this print? Okay, here's the cool thing about if statements. The main point of putting this here is that this block of code will only run if this statement is true. And since this is false, then this will not run, meaning that this prints out nothing. Okay, someone asks how we can use relational operators. And the idea of relational operators is let's assign raining to 3. And then let's say umbrella is 4. So we can use the same relational operators and put if raining is equal to umbrella, print raining. What do you think this will print? Okay, so if you remember from relational operators, this is asking if these two values are equal. So we have raining as 3 and umbrella as 4. So what this is basically saying is if 3 is equal to 4, and since 3 is not equal to 4, then this won't print, meaning that this again prints out nothing. So what if we switch the relational operator? Let's say we put raining is less than umbrella. What would this print? Okay, good. So this would print out raining, and when you print out the variable, it prints out the value of the variable, meaning it prints out 3. Okay, let's move on a little bit. The thing with if statements is that we have to pay attention to indentation, and this is something where Python is unique. Other languages use like brackets, but right now you should try and get in the habit of indenting things. So earlier in previous programs, we would have everything in the same indentation. However, when you put if statements, sometimes you want to execute code after the block of code, right? So let's say only if x is greater than 0, then I print x. But no matter whether or not x is greater than 0 or not, then no matter whether or not this is true, I will still print out high. And you need to let Python know what code you want to print out after the if statement and what code in the if statement. So Python has this thing where you indent anything inside of the if statement. So it will only print x if x is greater than 0. But even if x is less than 0, we print high. And the thing with Python is that it's very smart in a way. So if you don't have anything printed, then Python will actually run an error because it'll say, hey, you need something inside of the if statement. But if I were to say print umbrella, what do you think this would print out? Okay, so this would print out both umbrella inside here and raining outside here. And this isn't very special, but let's say we do this. So the condition of the if statement is now false. But if we print out umbrella, then, if we only print out umbrella if this statement is false, then this won't run because it's inside the if statement. But it'll still print out raining. So we will only print out 3. Okay, the next thing, someone asked about this previously, but I'm going to go over it right now, is the else. The idea of else is saying, okay, let's look at this example. This statement right here is false. And if this condition is true, then we will print out umbrella. But what if we want to execute a piece of code when something is not true, only if a condition is not true? Then we have the else. So the syntax of this is saying, if this happens, then we do this. Else, this will only execute if this is false, then we will do this. So let's look at this. If we add the else statement here, and then we put print raining, what do you think this will print? I'm just going to get rid of this line. Okay, so the idea of this is that since raining is not greater than umbrella, this condition is false. And since this condition is false, we skip this and instead go to the else where we print raining. So again, it would print 3. Another thing we can do is called nested if statements, and there are two main ways to do this. So let's just say I want to have multiple different versions of conditions. So if we want to have more than one condition that leads to different blocks of code, then we can use elif. So it's like a family of ifs. So we have if this first condition happens, then we do this block of code. And then the thing with elif is that only if this condition is false, then we will go and see if this condition is true. So it's kind of like saying we go down a list of conditions, and if as soon as one of these conditions is true, then we execute this block of code. So we have this first statement and condition, and if this statement is true, then we print this block of code, or do this block of code. And then if this statement is false, then we move on to this one, and we say, okay, if this is true, then let's do this. And then at the very end, we have the else statement, which is basically saying if both of these conditions were false, then we run this block of code instead. So let's add an elif. Elif umbrella is equal to 4. Oops. Print hi. So if we go over this piece of code, we can see that first we have raining an umbrella. And again, since this statement is false, we won't execute this, and instead we will go into the second statement, and we will see elif umbrella is equal to 4. We can see that since umbrella is equal to 4 is true, then this piece of code is true, and therefore we will print out hi. And then, so what if we change that simple condition? What do you think this would print out instead? So let's review this code. We have if raining is less than umbrella, and then we can see the value of raining is equal to 3, umbrella is equal to 4, then we can see that raining is less than umbrella, meaning that this statement is true. And if this statement is true, we execute this, and it would print out umbrella. Now here's something really important. If this statement is true, we never go to elif. So even if this statement is also true, this was given priority because it's the first condition, and because it's the first condition, we would say if this is true, then we print this out. And if we run this piece of code, we don't look at any of this. So even if this is true, it doesn't matter because we've already executed our piece of code. But what if we want to just be able to check all of these conditions? If we don't want to only run this if this is false, then we can get rid of the L and then instead make this so that it's like a second if statement. So in this case, what do you think this would print out? Okay, so the important thing to note about this is that in this statement, we have our first if statement being if raining is less than umbrella. And since this is true, then we will run this block of code, meaning that we will run print umbrella. And then we go on to the second one where we have if umbrella is equal to 4. And since this is a separate if statement, the outcome of this doesn't affect the second one because it's a separate statement. It's like running two different pieces of code. So we have if umbrella is 4, then we print out hi. So in this case, we would print out 4 and hi. Okay, the next kind of idea we have is that if we do a single if and then an else, and then an if, this is the actual nesting of if statements, then this is the same as this, and let's just look at it. So we have our first if statement being if something happens, then we run this, right? But if this is false, then we move on to the else statement and we execute everything in the else. So if this is false, then we look at the second nested if statement. And then we see if something else happens, then we run this. And then this second if statement has its own else. And the idea of this is saying that this if only runs if this if only runs if the condition of this is false. And then the idea of elif is that if we go into this and again, if something happens, we run this block of code. And then elif is saying that only if this is false, we look at this if statement. Elif this something else happens, we run this block of code, and then if neither of these conditions was true, we go over here. And then the important thing to remember is that over here we have this if statement would run no matter what the outcome of this one is, because they're two separate if statements. But when we combine them and put it into an elif, this only runs if this is false. And in the same way, since this is inside of the else, this will also only run if this is false. Okay, let's look at some examples of if statements. We have x is equal to 3. So let's break this apart piece by piece. If x is greater than 3, so is this true or false? What is the value of this? Just this operation here. Okay, great. Since x is equal to 3, then we can see that this is false, meaning that this doesn't happen. But when we look at the second elif and then we see x is equal to 3, then we see this is true because 3 is equal to 3. So we would print x is equal to 3. Okay, let's look at a similar example. What if x is equal to 4? What do you think that this would actually print out? Oops, sorry. Nope, I'm going the wrong way. Okay, so if we run this code, then we can see the first statement is if x is greater than 3. And then we have 4 is greater than 3, meaning that we print out x is greater than 3. And since none of the rest of the things happen, and since this condition is true, we don't run the second or the third condition, meaning that this would print x is greater than 3. Okay, what about x is equal to 1? What would this print? Okay, good. So we have, again, running through this, and then we see this statement is false. This statement is also false. Then the else statement would run, and then we would print out x is less than 3. Okay, now let's look at some combined examples and problems. What does this print out? Okay, so as people are saying, if we run this code, we have x as true, y as false, and then if x and y. And if you'll remember from previously, x and y is true and false is equal to false. So we would go to the else and print out no. Okay, what does this print? Okay, good. So if we go through this, if hiking and running, then this would be if true and false. Then true and false is false, so this wouldn't run. But since true or false is true, then this statement would be true and we would print just a bit. Okay, this is one of the final examples, I believe. Take a little bit longer to look at this. Okay, good. Let's kind of review the code. So we have today as Tuesday, raining as true. So we have the first if statement being if today is Monday. And since Tuesday isn't equal to Monday, then this is false. Since this is false, we move on to the next bit. Elif today is Tuesday. One thing to note is that we can compare strings with these operators. We can usually use equal to and not equal to. And the important thing to note about this is that if we have a lowercase t in Tuesday and an uppercase t in Tuesday, it wouldn't be the same. So let's kind of give an example of that. Let's have a variable today is Tuesday. If today is equal to Tuesday, print today. Else print not today. Well, no. What do you think this piece of code here would print out? Okay, and this is where it's kind of harder because when we use strings, it would actually print out no. And when you end up using strings, you have to realize that an uppercase letter and a lowercase letter they're two different strings. So when you add uppercase or if you add a space, then the strings are not exactly the same and therefore would print out no. Okay, so if we continue reviewing this code, we have L if today is Tuesday, and since these two strings are exactly the same, we go in, and then if raining is true, and since true is equal to true, the final ending is we print ping pong. And then since we finally got like a category that's true, we have to realize that none of the other else's will print. Okay, so now it's time for the kind of fun part. We're going to try a Kahoot today and then review some of the things. So let's play this and then teach. Okay, so for how many of you guys have done Kahoot before? You don't have to add your real name as long as your name isn't inappropriate or anything. Okay, so I think most people have started or used Kahoot before, but I'm gonna mute this. If you haven't used Kahoot before, you don't have to play, but I would like it if you played. You can go to kahoot.it, and then here we can enter the game pin, which is this number. And once you enter the name, then you can pick a nickname and enter. So let's try this. Okay, we're gonna make the Kahoot screen larger. We will be reviewing every question, so even if you can't actually do it, I'm going to be going over the questions. This question is from the very beginning of the class. We have the character used for multilines. Okay, so as you can see, the main thing to remember is a multiline is taking one statement and then putting it onto multiple lines. So we have this statement, this backslash here for that. And then the next guessed answer would be this, and this isn't called a multiline, it's putting lines together. Okay. So if you'll remember, comments are the ones where we add English or add anything you want, but it doesn't actually affect the code. Okay, so comments are used with the pound symbol or the hashtag as people call it. So I'm going to improve this a little bit more. Well, you can't see that. So comments again are the things where we add like commentary. Oh, okay, I need to stop doing that. So if you noticed again, it has if x, and since x is true, then the value is true. So we would print out the word yes. And then something to keep note for like a couple of questions in the future is when we print out strings, it doesn't actually print out the quotation marks. And then this is just an operator. It's okay if you guys accidentally choose wrong or something, because it doesn't actually matter and I won't be able to tell who chose what answer. Okay, so true and false. If you'll remember, and is only true if both values are true. And since we have a false, then this value is false. The one where it would be true is true or false. That would be true because at least one of them is true. So this is another operator. Okay, so 3 less than 10, we have 3 being smaller than 10, meaning that this would be true because 3 is less than 10. The rest of the questions will follow the what does this code print. Okay, so since the timers are longer, I'm going to end up like skipping it when there are like 10 seconds left because I'm still going to review it. Okay, so as we can see in here, the code was if true or false, print hello. And as I mentioned, the sorry, true or false, at least one of them is true, therefore the value of the statement is true. And then, as I'm briefly mentioned, but you should try and remember for future references, is that when we print out a string, we don't actually print out the quotes. So we would print out just the body text, which is hello. Okay, this one I would advise you to be really careful and think about what's commented and what's not. Uh, so this one's kind of trickier. The other thing I'll mention is please try not to rename yourselves because that's not me and I don't type in the chats. So okay, yeah, so this one did end up tricking a lot of people, but this is something to keep in notice when you end up writing. Sometimes you comment things out, but you always need to remember to uncomment it because when we have x equals 0, if you'll notice, comments in most Python like surfaces will have a different color, so pay attention for that. And if there's no variable x, then this would run an error because there's no x. So in this case, if this was uncommented, then it would print out by. But since it's not uncommented and we technically didn't give a value of x, then this would run an error. When reading code, another piece of advice is you want to read from top to bottom. So you want to kind of mentally be able to run the program in your head. So I'm going to start going over the, sorry, I'm going to start going over the problem. So we have x being assigned the value of 3, and then x being assigned the value of 2. Okay, so we have x being assigned the value of 3, and then x being assigned the value of 2. And if you remember from last class, this basically reassigns the value of 2 to x. And then we have y is 3, and then we compare 2 greater than equal to 3, and since 2 is not greater than equal to 3, we don't print out yes. This one might take a little bit longer to read, but don't panic. It's decently simple and basically is what we've learned. And then the other thing you should note is that when we have relational operators and I don't remember, logical operators, then we start with the relational operators and then we go first try this and then we and both of them. Okay, so this was a little bit harder, but if we look at this, we have x as 2, and then y is x plus 2. So what is x plus 2? Okay, so it would be 4 because 2 plus 2 is 4. And then our first if statement is asking if x is equal to 2. So since 2 is equal to 2, this is true, and y is not equal to 4. Well, since y is 4, this is false. So when we have true and false, this becomes false.